What is the relationship between the finite mind and the separate self, or the ego? The separate self, or ego, is simply a thought that arises in the finite mind, but not really in the finite mind, because the finite mind is not an entity. The finite mind itself takes the shape of a thought which believes or states that I, the finite mind, am a discrete and independently existing entity or self in my own right. With that belief, the finite mind seems to cease being simply the activity of infinite awareness and becomes, or seems to become, a discrete, independently existing entity. Of course, it never really becomes such. It is just a belief. That is the ego. In other words, it is the equivalent of the dreamed character, the character in the dream that we seem to become, through whose agency we perceive the dreamed world. It is as though the character in a dream were to assert, I am a character independent of the dreamer's mind. I have my own reality, my own independent existence. This is absurd. The dreamed character is simply the activity of our own mind, the activity through which, or in the form of which, we are able to perceive the activity of our own mind as the dreamed world. The dreamed character never becomes a character. It just believes, or it doesn't believe, because it is not present to believe something. Our own mind takes the shape of a thought which says the dreamed character is a real character. Likewise, one of the thoughts that arises, the finite mind, takes the shape of a thought that says, I, the finite mind, exist independent of infinite awareness. That belief alone is the ego. And all our suffering, and by suffering, please understand, I don't mean pain. I don't mean resistance that arises on behalf of the safety or the well-being of the body, of our body, or the body of one who is in our care. I don't consider that to be suffering. When I speak of suffering, I mean psychological or emotional suffering. Let me just pause here and make a very clear distinction between pain or distress that arises on behalf of the body and suffering which arises on behalf of the illusory separate self or ego. Physical pain or distress rises on behalf of the body. And one of the ways to distinguish between the two, if you are in any doubt, is that physical pain or distress, that is, resistance that arises on behalf of the safety or well-being of the body, does not require the support of thinking. If you are in physical pain, the physical pain does not depend upon thinking. You can be in intense physical pain without having any thoughts. Likewise, if you are hungry, there is an inherent discomfort to the experience of hunger. Hunger is supposed to be mildly uncomfortable, except in extreme cases, of course. Hunger is supposed to be uncomfortable. We are supposed to resist it, because that is what makes us respond by eating. If our house is on fire, We don't need to refer to thought to resist the situation. The resistance to the situation is a natural instinct that arises on behalf of the preservation of the body. Pain, hunger, an emergency in the environment, none of these experiences require the support of thinking. That's one of the ways, a very clear way of determining whether or not our resistance arises on behalf of the body or the separate self. Now, take the experience of jealousy. The body can be in a perfectly healthy, satisfied condition when we feel jealousy. So the jealousy does not arise on behalf of the body, and the jealousy obviously does not arise on behalf of awareness. The jealousy arises on behalf of an imaginary self that is created with the thought, I am a separate, independent entity. And it is not possible for jealousy to exist without thinking. This is one of the ways of distinguishing, a very effective way of distinguishing between pain or distress and psychological or emotional suffering. Psychological and emotional suffering always requires thought to support it. And the primary thought, which lies at the heart of all psychological or emotional suffering, is the separate self thought. I am a temporary, finite self. In other words, all our afflictive emotions arise on behalf of an illusory self. So I hope I have made it clear in an experiential, not just a philosophical way, the relationship between awareness and the finite mind and the separate self or ego. Of course, these are not three separate things. The finite mind is the activity of infinite awareness, and the separate self or ego is a single activity of the finite mind.